Stan Jabalisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV Whiskey 1. Good vibrations. A few videos ago, I asked the question, how are the ham bands doing? Basically asking you viewers, what kind of band conditions have you been experiencing lately, particularly on the HF bands and the 160 meter band, that is 160 through 10 meters, and perhaps occasionally 6 meters. And the general consensus was that the higher frequency bands, 15 meters, 12 meters, 10 meters, and the VHF band of 6 meters, are not doing well at all. Whereas 160 meters is doing pretty well. And that is consistent with the fact that right now we are in a solar minimum, a period of minimum solar activity. The solar activity, the number of sunspots, generally goes in cycles of about 11 years, peaking about once every 11 years and then bottoming out alternately every 11 years. Actually, the polarity of the solar magnetic field reverses every time this happens, so it's actually a 22-year cycle, but it appears for all intents and purposes here on Earth and the ham radio bands as an 11-year cycle. I have heard numerous reports or theories that we are about to enter a prolonged period of much lower than normal solar activity, something similar to what they called the Maunder minimum. I think that occurred around the 1700s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, sometime in that period. I forget exactly when. If that is indeed true, we're going to have much worse conditions on the upper HF bands than we have experienced in decades or even centuries, if that is true. But I don't see why that necessarily has to be true. Every solar peak is a little different in activity than the one before it or the one after it, and recently they seem to have, the past couple or three have seemed to been of lesser intensity than before. But as for whether we're going to get a Maunder minimum repeat, I don't know where anybody comes up with such a theory. I don't think there's anywhere near enough data or evidence to support that theory. I think it's just a speculation. The next solar maximum that we get may be the best we've ever had. But remember again that during the solar minimum, the lower frequency HF bands and 160 meters tend to work better than they do when there's more solar activity, particularly 80 and 160. And as for the new bands at frequencies lower yet, remains to be seen. We have to do some experimenting and find that out. But I would say take heart, take advantage of what conditions you can get when you can get them. It helps an awful lot, by the way, if you can locate your antenna away from your house where all the appliances make so much noise, human-made noise. And my antenna is just awful in that respect. And it also helps, from what I understand, to have a horizontally polarized versus a vertically polarized antenna. So, say a half-wave dipole fed with open wire line at 150 feet, center-fed random dipole fed with open wire at 150 feet, should you happen to live in such a location, ought to be your best bet. Failing that, I would just try to get the antenna as far away from your house as possible and have it be horizontally polarized if possible and not vertically polarized. Those are the conclusions that I can come to theoretically and from a practical experience standpoint. But as for this business about we're entering a long-term minimum solar activity period that will last decades, don't worry about that kind of stuff. Number one, we can't do a bloody thing about it anyway, and number two, I see no reason to believe that such a thing will happen. I see no evidence. I don't think we can have any idea. We just have to wait and see. Part of the fun of amateur radio. Stan Gibilisco signing off, saying 73. And so long, which, no matter what part of the solar cycle we're in, whether there's a Maunder minimum or not, whatever frequency I happen to be on, shall always translate to da-da-da-da-da-da.